Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. Today's episode is part two of my conversation with Craig Shelton. Part one appeared 2 or 3 weeks ago, where he talked about his experience as a chef and a restaurateur in New York. Today, we're going to talk about his intellectual program called Integral Liberty. This is an hour and a half, and it is quite dense, quite fascinating, and it's worth your time listening to what he has to say. Because I see that much of what he says conforms to what I see, but at a much higher level of thought. It's a very interesting conversation, and he's addressing what I would consider the challenges that modern thought have brought to us and have been shown to be wanting. And so he is seeking to provide a way to bring a type of integration to all that we think and know and experience in life. And I think it's worth listening to. There are many people that I know who have no, they don't have an academic background of writing long, long theses, but they do have a background of thinking deeply about things. And I'm finding that there's a growing number of people who are thinking at a very deep level, and they're disconnected from an academic institution, and therefore they really are free to allow their thinking to roam as far as they can. Doesn't mean that we should accept everything they say. It does mean that we should be engaged with what they're saying so that we seek to understand it, and maybe, just maybe, you find some inspiration which says, I think I'm going to write something. I'm finding increasingly that writing a short book, many of my guests have written short books, 100 pages, 150 pages, and they're very good, and they're useful. They're very useful. And they're an expression of the person themselves. And I think Craig's Integral Liberty series is an expression of Craig as this deeply intellectual person who has much to share with us in the world. So sit down, relax, take a breath, have a cup of coffee, and listen to our conversation, because it's not all high level philosophical. It's also very practical things about the way that our world works, and I think you'll find it quite interesting. You may not agree with all of it, but I think you will find it provocative and interesting enough for you to be engaged with what he's saying. And I'm grateful that you're here, and I wish you well as you listen to my conversation with Craig Shelton. Thank you very much.
Once you can see that, Ed, what if I was to tell you I see that in almost every single industry? That the modeling is so abstract
Yeah.
and has been drifting so far from reality. And you feel that in your heart, and you know you've experienced it everywhere you
I
turn.
know it. I don't just
Human
do it.
beings
I know
have
it.
human beings have lost their faith in their institutions. And it's not because the people in those institutions are intentionally trying to mislead
No.
anything. It's a civilizational problem that happened. My work called Integral Liberty, my opus magnus, I have to publish it in 8.5 by 11 because there's spreadsheets and charts and analytics, but also because it's so large. If it was in the standard 6 by 9 format, it'd be just about 5,000 pages. The integral liberty is basically started as an investigation. I have irrefutable evidence 30 years ago that civilization has lost its way.
What
That
does that mean? What does that mean?
it means that the institutions, the industries, almost all human activity is acting in the worst interests of human beings and the ecosphere.
Yeah.
And they can't help it. Okay. So I don't know how much time we still have. I'll try to
Well, as far as I'm
compress.
concerned, we can go as long as we want, and if necessary, we'll divide this into two parts.
Oh, fantastic. Oh my God, thank you.
Let me just say a couple of things in response to what you said. Um, there is a difference between abstractions that are simply ideas and abstractions which are intended to clarify something that's real, and that
Yes.
the missing element in all modern thought is realism or reality.
Yes.
And
Yes, exactly.
I had a conversation with a Scottish theologian a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about some of the scientists that we both know, and and we were, he's a theologian, so we were talking about faith, of coming to faith, and
This is going to be such an extraordinary conversation we're having. I mean, oh, Ed,
so let me
I
let me
didn't,
tell you what he said.
oh,
Let me tell you
okay,
what
please, please,
he
please.
said. They're all wanting to talk about faith, and they want to talk about religion, and they want to talk about the reenchantment of civilization. They want to talk about all these things. So, but there's this thing that they can't let go of, which is process philosophy, process
Whitehead,
thought. And
Alfred Lord Whitehead.
that's right. That's right.
Yes,
Right over here on my stack of books.
good.
And what, you know, and I didn't grow up with that thinking. I grew up with a very realistic worldview. And what I realized is that um, what we end up finding ourselves in is a cul-de-sac that we cannot get out of unless we turn around and walk away from all the things that we have been taught
Yes,
and begin to re-engage with reality as something real and something that is beyond my capacity to know it in some kind of absolute totality.
this is the conversation of conversations.
Hmm.
Of
Yeah.
okay, so I'm going to come at this from about 20 different angles in a concerted fashion. I'm going to start like they say when you give a speech, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them. Then you tell them, then you tell them what you told them. I'm going to outline how my work, I believe, proves what you've said, and so much more. It's going to take the historical track of what we call the Enlightenment and show that we made a bargain for the right reasons. We wanted to stop religious wars. We wanted to allow pluralism. We wanted there to be less violence. And so, between Francis Bacon and David Hume, we started to create the notion of empiricism, strict strict empiricism as the basis of knowledge. The trilemma, Agrippa's trilemma, was thought to be an impenetrable justification of that. And I can tell you that I believe I've solved that problem as well. I never set out to create anything theological. Every single step of my work is purely rational, purely first principles thinking, purely, and in fact, so much of it is based on the cutting edge, leading edge science of our day right now. Okay. In other words, I did not start off with a single a single sacred assumption.
Mm-hmm.
But where it has led
Mm-hmm.
is shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in classical philosophy, dating back to Aristotle, is the idea of a unified philosophical system. Honestly, I had not given that a thought since I left college. I studied philosophy in Yale quite a bit too. And in a lot since then. I think, Ed, I've read more than 8,000 important books in my life. And philosophy is, and theology were, also always very important to me, along with science, literature. So I have a very broad, balanced brain of an intense amount of preparation, both in the humanities and in sciences, which is rare in this world today of specialization. Um, so um, I started from this idea of, look, I'm seeing patterns in what I call a generator functions, right? Like there's something about our banking system, the way it's set up, that is playing a role beneath what ordinary people are able to even see. It's an invisible motor that is directing capital in such a way that it's concentrating wealth at the expense of productivity, at the expense of wages.
Mm-hmm.
And then I discovered that this has been known for 235 years. The Germans discovered that banking was only serving the civilizational dispurpose of concentrating wealth, of basically extracting wealth from the bottom 98% to the top. How? We have been taught in school absolute lies about the economic system. We have been taught that banks are merely financial intermediaries. That is, they take money, they accept savings, what is called deposits. They accept those savings and pay out very small interest on that. They lend those same savings out to other impatient people at higher interest rates, and they live off the spread between the two.
Mm-hmm.
That is the complete lie we were all taught. And by the way, that's an aside. The integral liberty unified philosophical system predicts that in ontological evacuation, when a civilization voluntarily evacuates, that is, dismisses its own ontology, that is, okay, we used to have, say, a theological ontology. Now we say there's no such thing as absolute truth. An entire predictable cascade of things will happen.
Are happening.
Yes. One of them is runaway local optimization. They are, I call them the four horsemen of the apocalypse of evacuated
Hmm.
ontology. They are starting with abstraction, which leads to severance, which leads to instrumentalization, which
Hmm.
leads to runaway local optimization. These are the symptoms we see in every institution, in every industry, even in families. Okay. Another super important point is the work of Ian McGilchrist, whose studies of the lateralization of the brain.
Hmm.
His the entry point to his work is the question that every animal faces since time immemorial. How do I get my lunch without becoming someone else's lunch? And the universe decided to solve that issue efficiently by creating two different forms of consciousness. Left hemispheric consciousness is the spotlight, controls the right hand. How do I grab? How do I take? How do I get? It also atomizes things. It sees parts rather than systems. It, to put it technically, reifies. It treats as objects things that are beings or things that are complex systems. Right hemispheric is the floodlight consciousness. It's omnidirectionally aware. It's not so concerned with giving every little thing a name. It sees the big picture.
Yeah.
For the brain to be in balance, McGilchrist assures us, and his scientific reasoning is without flaw,
Right.
is one of the most, I take that back. I believe that McGilchrist's The Matter with Things, most important book of the last 200 years, because it touches everything.
I agree with you.
And and I thought, great, what's wonderful, and
Great man. A great man.
a great man. And you know his story, right? He was an Oxford Don in literature. He got upset with identity politics, um, inability to produce anything truly constructive with literature. And then he said, screw that, I'm going to go. And he got his degree in medical school and became the world's leading researcher on the lateralization of the mind.
I would say that when we hit the year 2100, he will be the only scientist of the 21st century that will be still talking about.
Well, I think he will be in the pantheon, no doubt. I think that Donald Hoffman's work is very important. But at any rate, uh, I think that we are on the cusp right now of a major breakthrough in human understanding. Back to now, he's also showing that the brain is only balanced when the right hemisphere is in charge and the left hemisphere serves it. Only it sees the truth. Okay,
Let me tell you one more thing.
please.
When I first met Ian, I told him that the matter with things read like my biography.
Wow. Wow.
It really does. I'm very right brain thinking, and it was it was validation of all that I had thought of myself being, but had found no validation in the way the modern world is structured.
Well, Ed, we share some of that deeply, deeply. I can tell we're like brothers in this journey.
There are a lot of us out there.
Yes, there has to be.
There is.
And remind me later to tell you the story of the movie The Matrix from a chef's point of view, which is
Oh yes, I'd love to hear
kind
that.
of kind of an amusing
I'm gonna write
story.
that down.
Yeah. So we get back to McGilchrist here, and he's saying that The right brain, the right hemisphere must be in charge, but the left hemisphere must also be in full power, but it must serve. The
Serve
right
and
hemisphere
support.
has to have the final say, right? An interpretation and all. Okay. There have only been 3 times in Western civilization when that's ever happened, according to McGilchrist, and that was Periclesian, the height of ancient Greece, the height of ancient Rome, and the height of the Renaissance period, right? Christian medievalism and all that. Very interesting. Once again, remember, I told you my entire formation was from those books.
That's right.
Okay. Number 2, so were our founders of America. The founders of America had borrowed ontology from ancient Greece, from ancient Rome, from the civilization, the Middle Age, Renaissance, and Christian greatest writers, Aquinas, and Dante, and so forth. So, well, in honor of McGilchrist, okay, I started writing Integral Liberty after I wrote Up from Neoliberalism, which is a deep, deep, deep critique of the economics of British banking. I really got to close that loop. The Germans discovered 240 years ago that there was a different way of running banks, such that all boats would rise. And this is technically called using sectoral guidance of credit, meaning they understood 2.25 centuries ago that banks create 100% of the money they so-called lend out of thin air. No savings are ever lent out. Banks take savings and invest them for returns in certain areas, bonds or whatever. Expand their reserves if a nation requires a reserve ratio. But the thing that we've been taught about, the thing that we've been taught that banks lend savings is patently false. We knew it 100 years ago. 100 years ago, the time of Henry George, Progress and Poverty, the second most popular book in the entire nation.
I have it.
If every house had more than one book, they had the Bible and they had Henry
Ancient
George's
biblical.
Progress and
Yeah.
Poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, the credit creation theory of banking was the only thing taught. And Richard Vernon goes over this ad infinitum, and he's just a brilliant, brilliant man. Well, some banking interests funded certain groups of people to come up with alternative theories that progressively hid more deeply and more deeply the truth. The second wave of banking theory tried to pin it on government with the fractional reserve theory of banking, saying, well, banks still make money, but it's really only the central bank that makes the money, and then it's distributed through. And since the central bank is a government agency, well, we can now blame the government rather than the private sector. And of course, this is false in America because the Federal Reserve is not really a public institution. It's a public-private hybrid. Okay. But then that wasn't good enough of a lie. We needed to invent the financial intermediation theory of banking, which is what we were all taught in school. Absolutely false at every possible level. And what Germans were realizing is that if banking is collateral based and allowed to go into any sector, banks will think falsely, stupidly, that lending against collateral is safe. And it would be if banks were only lending savings. It makes perfect sense then. That would be the safest way to lend against assets that
Mm-hmm.
are collateral. But because banks do not lend pre-existing savings, 100% of the money they simply create, it used to be called pen stroke money, book money. They simply, when banks purchase financial instruments, we technically should call them securities. A mortgage agreement is a private security. It has a face value based on the future income stream adjusted for risk. They said, okay, these payments over the next 20 years, based on your credit rating, give a face value of $1 million, Ed. Here you will find the $1 million in your checking account. We're simply going to deposit it there. That money never existed 10 seconds ago. They simply book a liability, customer deposit, and customer and the asset of your agreement, your mortgage agreement, simultaneously. Okay.
Never let the right hand know what the left hand is doing.
Yes. So this is a magic. This is one industry, one tiny group of people are given this right to create money out of thin air and collect compound interest upon it. Okay. So the Germans realized early on this is encouraging all the money to go into assets instead of productive use. Instead of building factories and technologies, we're simply driving up the price of land, driving up the price of buildings, but mostly the land. And all it really is a mechanism for wealth redistribution that is massively regressive. So they said, we have a solution. We're going to say, commercial banks, you will still be allowed to create money out of thin air, because they intuited then that you cannot have any growth sustainable without increasing the money supply. Okay.
Right.
So we need to increase the money supply, but we need to direct it to a use that is pro-civilization rather than anti-civilizational. So they said, we identify three sectors: consumer goods or consumer purchases, right? Financial transactions, that's where a mortgage is a financial transaction. Nothing new is created, just changing hands. When you buy shares of IBM in the stock market exchanges, that is a financial transaction. Not one penny of your money goes to IBM. You're just paying the person who owned those shares before you. Financial transactions. And then finally, you have what's called industrial banking. This is going to finance the enlargement of a business, the creation of a new business, the creation of a new factory, the retooling of a factory. Okay. And so they said, as a commercial bank, you are not allowed to make loans in either of those first two sectors, only in the industrial sector. Okay. Now, we will have other financial institutions for these other things. For mortgages, you have Landesbanks. These are almost like our local credit unions. Credit unions do lend out savings, okay? So if you want a mortgage in Germany, until the EU screwed it all up, okay? All right. Because of these changes, Germany became the economic powerhouse of Europe. No one could compete with them. Why? Because when you allow British-style banking, so much of the money that is created gets parked into assets unproductively. Okay. And all the incentive structures are wrong for capitalism. Okay. What ends up happening is you create an economy that is mostly based on economic rents, on gatekeeping, on extraction. Okay. The German model creates powerhouse economics. It's been copied by Japan from World War II until the mid 80s. They had the single greatest growth from, industrialization, quality of life. And then a couple of bankers decided that they weren't getting paid the same as American bankers get paid, and so the princes of the end, that whole story. They sold Japan down the river. They ruined the lives of almost all citizens of Japan.
That's Richard Werner's story because he was there.
Precisely.
Yeah.
He's the one. He's the one who invented the term quantitative easing. It's just a brilliant man, okay? And he
Yeah, it is.
sees it
Yeah.
with such clarity.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he is German.
Yes, exactly. And he's trying to save the banking system in Germany from, well, let's face it, the EU is not structured on German style banking.
Yeah.
The EU, Brussels, is structured on British style banking. Okay. So this is one of the things, as an aside, you talk about how socialist governments are so, there's a lot of belief that the socialist governments are more beneficial for the common folk. But there is an interesting counter example to this, which is if you're looking at wealth, if you're looking at wealth inequality, Gini's, rather than income inequality, the second highest in the OECD, right, after America is Sweden. Why does Sweden have such an incredibly high wealth inequality? Okay. And the answer is it practices British style banking rigorously as opposed to German style banking. Now, Michael Hudson, one of the greatest economists living, made the point on a video that World War I was not fought about the Archduke of,
Right.
whatever. That it was a war, a war of banking civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
That the French and British elites knew that their nations could never compete against Germany's economic engine due to their banking system. And rather than adopt their form of banking, sectoral credit guidance, it was preferable to just go to war and try to extinguish that form of banking. And
Yep.
as you know, America was originally going to join Germany in World War I, but then some bankers visited President Woodrow Wilson and convinced him to join the British and the French. The world would be markedly different. And this acceleration would have been, to some degree, slowed down. This acceleration of abstraction and so forth.
So in many respects, we're we're at the end of this season that began with World War One that has brought us to the brink of whatever you want to call this. I mean, that's what I see, and that um, we have to go through this in order to recover. There's no.
So far, yeah, so far I've been telling you a lot of things that maybe seem negative. I know I want to switch soon into
It's
all the positives
I
that I
wouldn't
have
call
to
it
share with you.
negative. It's just observational. If
Yes, it's true.
you're just looking at what's going on.
Right.
This
It's
is
just
what
the
you
truth.
and
It's
you
just the
don't
truth.
and you. I mean, the only course I've ever flunked was an econ course, and even I
Because you
because I didn't
you're,
understand
you're rational.
I didn't understand the multiplier.
Because it's a fiction.
And one of my guests was I had on a few weeks ago who's an economics professor says, well, we don't use that anymore. So I think I should apply to get my course reinstated. And I'm joking. Um, what I would
I want to
here's
close the loop on McGilchrist though, just quickly.
okay. Let's
So
do
I
that.
started I
I have to.
started writing Integral Liberty with the idea of diagnosis. Okay. I had done some of that work in Up from Neil. It was with a set of policy prescriptions that I knew, right? Because Germany already proved what sectoral credit guidance would do for an economy. And then, my other number one generator function was taxation, right? This is a radical experiment that America started in 1913, the idea of taxing income rather than, well, we call it income taxation. That is, again, a distortion. It's really labor taxation. Okay.
Yeah.
And not only did we didn't even just stop there, then we added the labor taxes on, for Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security and all of that too. So I started out with this idea that, we could fix. Upper neoliberalism diagnosed the polycrisis. Of the 76 identified threats to civilization and humanity itself, what percentage of a role are these two generator functions? Okay. And it used various types of modeling in the mathematics. And, I'm not going to bore the audience with the forms unless you're a statistical expert. Some of them were, using counter examples going backwards. And, but, if you know statistics, you'll be able to predict what type of thing. And what it said was that in 3/4 of these 76, these two generator functions were the number one, number two, or number three cause for these things. Okay. Well, that alone, to me, justified writing a book of the solution sets. All right. Now, here's what's interesting. You've got that technical work on the economic system, but you've also got McGilchrist's work, which is the fact that our brains are out of balance. And combining that was the starting point. So I made this decision from moment one. I'm going to start Integral Liberty, Part 1, Volume 1, in full left hemispheric hypertrophy, exactly where our civilization is today. Left brain in charge, not the right brain. Massively technical, massively abstract. So the first several essays are almost like quant-like work, quantitative analysis, politics, political parties, economic systems, all this. And I tell that from the onset in the introduction, don't let that stop you. If it's painful, good, it should be. Read it lightly and keep moving till you get to part 2. Part 3. What happens is as you move forward, it's being written from a rebalancing point of view so that by the time you get to volume 2, towards the end, it's in full right hemispheric dominance again. And when you get to the final essay, it's full right hemispheric sensorium, full attunement, okay? With music, pieces you're supposed to listen to simultaneously, and on and on, okay? Well, then the book grew from there. Somehow in that early envisioning of the book and writing that, like they say, the way doesn't present itself until you start walking, right?
Mhm.
And then as I was writing volumes 1 and 2, suddenly I realized I was onto something. and it became apparent. I had a number, more than 20 of these crystallization moments like Ramanujan had, where things just suddenly became a cascade of clarity.
Mhm.
And so book volume 3 is the crystallization of what became Integral Liberty's unified philosophical system, which in classical is you have to first establish the ontology, right? And that means, how do you prove what is the ontological primary? A fancy word that means the building block out of which everything else is made in our creation. When we say building block, it doesn't necessarily imply it has to be material. It could be. You don't take any presuppositions into the work. Well, I did an elimination proof, okay? And we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to explain to the audience what it means is there's 5 steps to a unified philosophical system. The ontology is the base level. That is the philosophy, the science of what is. What is at the base? What can we actually say is? The next level up from that is epistemology. What can we say we know? How do we know that we can know anything? Right? How do we know? On what basis do we know? The next level up after epistemology is anthropology. What does that imply about man? I want to make it very clear that each step up is dictated, or more formally, the word is entrained by what is established in the lower foundation, entrains, dictates what must be the next level. So the ontology dictates the epistemology dictates the anthropology. The anthropology dictates the ethics, and the ethics dictates the philosophical system, or the political philosophy. Okay, that is the classical construction.
Um,
No human being has ever created one of these. Only a tiny number of human beings have ever created one at all, probably under 20. But according to my research, no one has ever done so without resorting to some type of either theological grounding, like Agrippa's trilemma, that all propositional statements are grounded either in one of three things: theology, or some just assumption, infinite regress, or circularity. If my proofs that are in book 4, that's where I do the technical proofs of the elimination proof of what is the ontological primary. Okay. If this holds to scientific academic scrutiny, usually in a 20-year period, it will be the first time in human history someone has created a unified philosophical system without resorting to theology. Even Aristotle resorted to the prime mover. Okay. So, if you create an ontology, and if you say, here are my proofs, and it's accepted, you can, by what I just described, create an ethics. Okay. If your ontology is not grounded in theology, which I claim that my ontology is grounded in scientific, secular, pure first principles reasoning. Okay.
mhm.
That means I've created for the first time in human history an ontologically based ethics that is not theological whatsoever. Okay, now is when it's going to get really interesting. I created an ethics engine. I call it ILEE, ILEE, Integral Liberty Ethics Engine. Okay. And on my website, craigshelton.com, I have 30-page papers on each of the first 3 pages. The page that describes integral liberty takes you through the UPS, the unified political system, unified philosophical system. There's a page called Ethics Engines, okay, plural, and it describes how these things are related. Okay. I'm going to get to now, this is completely from another sphere. When I was a young man at Yale, I had this moment of clarity in which I was reading Matthew 22, 35 through 40, where the lawyer, meaning one of the Sadducees versus, right, and it's like which of all the laws is the greatest law? And this was a competition for status, right, amongst these two competing uh, primary tribes of the Judaics in the area. And Jesus says the most remarkable thing that lips have ever uttered. To me, Matthew 22, 35 through 40, is the most remarkable use of words that the world has ever heard. He said, the first commandment is to love God, to love God with all your heart and all your mind and your soul. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And then this sentence, upon these two hang, krematai, hang all of the laws and the prophets. To me, this is the announcement of the fourth covenant, which is completed on the cross. I'm not alone in understanding the significance, that there is massive significance to this. Augustine of Hippo wrote of it, St. Augustine, others. And I catalog that in my latest book called The Parables of Jesus. Okay. I created an ethics engine based on Matthew 22, 37 through 40. Those three things. Okay. And I added the hermeneutical. I wrote one essay in my book, Light Made Flesh, how this is not Jesus simply summating the laws. It's not a declaration that the laws have this kind of character. He, in my opinion, is stating humanity needs to move up to the next level of consciousness in which this is realized as the ethics engine. That if you interpret anything, any phrase, any verse from the Bible in such a way that it violates either the vertical axis of truth and love of God, or it violates the horizontal axis, love of neighbor. If it violates either of those, you are away from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I said, wow, let me create an ethics engine on Jesus Christ's hermeneutic. It is unoriginally called JCHEE, Jesus Christ's hermeneutic ethics engine. So now I have two completely different ethics engines, which are they are giving information, they are giving answers to the questions that the most important questions we have on earth, right? It's giving extraordinary answers. And then all of a sudden, I started asking questions simultaneously to this, right? The same question to both. We just completed an independent, right? 1,000 question test of these two ethics engines on a whole slew of different categories. Civilizational survival is one, family, and et cetera, et cetera. 9.6 out of 10 level of convergence. Like spooky. The implication of this for theologians and scientists alike is that they're mutually corroborative. There is no scientifically possible way of saying that a carpenter 2,000 years ago issued three sentences that are equal in ethical power to the work that I did that required all of the science, all of the educational advancement of the human race in 2,000 years, plus supercomputers and artificial intelligence applications, and on, that these things are so congruent. It says several things here. One is that Christ has accessed a level of truth that has evaded us for thousands of years since, right? And so these two systems are self-corroborating, but they are also protections against drift for each other. So part of what I've been doing, as you know, Ed, and how we met, was I've been saying that this integral liberty ethics engine is the missing piece for AI safety. Now, my own belief is this. I believe that the danger of AI is not so much Terminator, right? The day of the robots turning on us, as it's an accelerator of what's already wrong in our civilization.
Right.
Okay. And what is now maybe a good transition to this what is wrong. The integral liberty unified philosophical system identifies it profoundly. And it identifies what's wrong with the competing ontologies. In the world of science today, structural realism is the one that seems to be most powerful because of its profound predictive powers in the world of theoretical physics. Great. And I've written a number of essays, and they're included in volume 4, that critique structural realism as being not only untrue relative to base reality, but more importantly, as evil, unintentionally evil. So, just like I indicated before, you can take any ontology and following the principles of philosophy, you can create an ethics, right? The ontology entails the epistemology, anthropology, ethics. When you do that with structural realism, you get exactly the four horsemen of evil: abstraction, severance, instrumentalization, and runaway local optimization. When you use integral liberties, secular ontology, you get a civilization whose ethics is about preserving human flourishing and ecological flourishing, the dignity of man. It is finally what we've been waiting for, the substantiation of what our forefounders in America all believed, that our rights are granted by our, as inalienable. Now, all those signers of the Declaration and the Constitution, probably each one disagreed from the other about what that ultimate grantor is. Some were theistic, some were Christians, some were, maybe said, there's something, but we have no idea what it is. There was nothing except disagreement on the characterization of what it is that's granting rights as inalienable. But they 100% of them agreed that rights are inalienable. Eiley proves it. It proves it. And when you take Eiley's ontology, you create a remember, the final step is the political philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it resembles deeply what our forefathers described lyrically.
Yeah.
And it solves the problem of runaway local optimization. It solves the problem of extraction as the primary purpose of our economic system. It solves the problems of education. It solves the problems of truth. The problem of truth now becomes the central piece of integral liberty. It locates what happened with the Enlightenment. We would agree to simply bracket metaphysics in the effort of producing peace, the end of religious wars. Of course, it was an abject failure on that level. The 20th century was the most violent century the world has ever known. And most of the violence was from people trying to eliminate religion or eliminate forms of religion or change, it's Mao, Stalin, etc., even Hitler, right? So now we're at this point where we're saying, what was the unintended consequence of dethroning religion? And again, I will stipulate that dethroning religion was highly called for based on the behavior of organized religions up to that point. But we did it without replacing it. We thought we could get away with just putting those questions in a box. And it didn't stay there. We didn't say we acknowledge that there's a God of some sort or a prime driver or some metaphysical truths. We said we're just not even going to talk about it. Over time, that elided, that moved until we finally, in the last 50 years have been pushing the idea that there's no such thing as ontological truth, that there's no such thing as objective truth, that all the relativistic forms of truth, and a whole different slew of them. And this has been an extraordinary civilizational vacuum. The implications of it are in every direction. When a nation or a civilization undergoes ontological evacuation, that doesn't say that rights will be preserved through procedures. You've opened a vacuum that only power can fill. Okay. So I read a number of essays criticizing proceduralism as the basis of our laws, constitutional, right?
Mhm.
If you understand proceduralism, then the following statement is theoretically true. As long as all of the players in government follow the procedures as dictated in the law in creating a in creating a constitutional amendment, no matter what it says, then it's constitutional. Okay.
Yeah.
By that reasoning, if three-quarters of the states, whatever, decided to restore slavery and they followed all the procedures correctly, then that constitutional amendment would be constitutional. Okay. And integral liberty says that's a crock of shit. That is absolutely the most evil statement that any attorney could ever make. Okay. To understand our system of governance is helpful to think of a computer's structure. We, the people, the individual families, the individual people, our businesses, our institutions, our governments, that's the hardware. Okay? The Constitution is not just some document out there. It is the BIOS. It is the firmware. It is what defines what is. It is the ontological statement that allows the Constitution to have something to say about our reality. Every single constitutional law must be evaluated its fidelity to the ontology dictated by the Declaration. And finally, our amendments are like updates in a software program. The Constitution is the software, the amendments are the updates, the Declaration is the ontological firmware or BIOS, and we the people are, and our institutions, our business, that is the hardware. Understood in that fashion, we resolve so many vexations in our day-to-day living that the proceduralist method of running institutions has completely disserved humanity for the last 100 years.
What I would add to this, and it's not so much a counter to what you're saying, but what I would add to this is that you're presenting to us a systems perspective, and systems are a very popular topic.
Yes,
And I have friends who are in the systems world who say that systems don't exist. So the dynamic of conversation about this is just beginning.
yes,
And I think that's important. But this is what I see.
please.
I see that all our conceptualization, that we who are prone to that, we may be very right brain people, but our left brain is always hyperactive because
Yes,
we're trying to make sense. We're trying to make sense of the world in a conceptualized way.
yes,
Um, what I find though is that people who have not been trained to be left brain thinkers. I have
Yes.
I have lots of friends who barely got out of high school,
Yes.
and they're the wisest people I know.
To some
And
degree, yes.
and and what I think is the thing that the people in the academic departments of the great universities of the world do not understand are the people who actually make things run in the world.
Yes. Ed,
And
you are anticipating exactly where I was heading next. Okay. So getting back to the left brain, right brain thing, which is really where we're residing this. On the home page of Integral Liberty, I wrote an essay about the vacuum of solidarity. To put it bluntly, I don't see the political atmosphere as left versus right.
I agree.
What I see it is one group that is trying to complete the ontological evacuation to a 100% level, and the other group that's trying to resist it doesn't even really know how or why it's doing what it's doing. It's doing it more in an instinctual way. It
Mhm.
knows something's wrong. It
Mhm.
doesn't quite know what's wrong, but it's resisting. And both sides are very ugly because neither side is based in a firm understanding of truth. It's grasping. Okay. So integral liberty, more of the writing in there is about what we need to do to restore. Okay. Craft is one of the things I talk about endlessly. The fact that we took craft out of public schools, cooking, wood shop, auto, mechanics, all of these things were vital. And I told you earlier, I was going to tell you about the story of the chef in terms of the
Yeah.
matrix. Okay. Once you understand that private equity has a job, which is to find any last remnants of craftsmanship, root them out, and replace them with robotics or systems. Okay.
Yeah.
Left hemisphere's belief that any form of craft can be replaced by systems, which is a reification statement of the first degree. Okay. Cooking always has problems with scaling, always. Because if you're truly cooking, then you have attunement to the ingredients that are coming in. Real cooking only happens with real ingredients coming in, not commodities, right?
Right.
And the chef must be totally in sensorium awareness. It's not even at the level of logic. Logic participates, but most of what's going on is sensorium analysis at a level of base existence of the confrontation, or not the encounter between
Hmm.
the existence
Yeah.
and self. Okay, so in integral liberty are chapter after chapter, part after part. I mean, probably 40 or 50 different essays covering every different domain. The changing in psychology. Okay,
Yeah.
from this idea that there's something wrong inside the the person exhibiting symptoms, never questioning the environment. Right? Okay.
Right.
What causes flourishing? So it's hard for me to compress what's there in about 4,000 pages of work. Going back to my restaurant book, the second book is called the Companion Workbook. And it lists an additional 350 more intellectual fallacies, some of which, maybe the first 50, lengthier explanations, but invites you to take it as your own problem with training wheels. And then roughly 300 of them with the de minimis explanation. By this point, you ought to be able to take them on your own with the critical skills. But in the beginning, it says you cannot manage a business well if you are stuck in left hemispheric hypertrophy. You need to become right hemispheric strong. And it
Right.
goes through a whole set of practices and disciplines and different ways of being. So, part of what makes Integral Liberty so different from any other philosophical work is the fact that I'm a chef. And so, the relationship of craft, attunement, of right hemispheric power is baked into the cake, to use an unfortunate metaphor here, an unfortunate pun, I mean. Um, so, yeah, what it's showing, number one, and I'm working diligently on continuing to what volume 4 says about the ontological primary. Are you ready? It eliminates all other possibilities. The only possibility that remains is that the ontological primary is rational articulation, pure thought. Now, it does not, but it establishes that consciousness is primary, matter is derivative and secondary.
Okay.
Okay. Now I've been working on papers that you've seen things like that Lee has a safety feature because it is grounded in the world's first unified philosophical system that has reached the truth about reality in a scientific method. The things that I had available to work with, Whitehead did not have 100 years ago. He did not have theoretical physics, biology, right? Today, I'm talking about more than 20 different leading edge scientific things, such as work in bioelectricity, being non-local, okay? Dealing with the Noble brothers top down rather than only bottom up, like Dawkins, as far as DNA and evolution, okay? There's all sorts of information out there which is all pointing to the same thing, that at base, at foundation of reality, there is only information, or there is not matter. There, it is different. There are rule spaces, there are boundaries, informational boundaries, and there, etc. So I can say that the only reason I was able to do this is because of the advancements made by science. Okay. Now, for theologians, I am presenting the possibility for a pluralistic world for secular people and religious people alike, as long as they accept those boundary conditions of that are described by Lee. That your rules, your interpretations, your living in society must, and again, you could say that the JCHE are nearly identical. So that means truth, neighbor, relationship. As long as you can conform your religious beliefs within a very healthy set of guardrails, we can have pluralism to some degree, to a significant degree, for secular as well as theological. I think that this book, the Parables of Jesus, we need to get it in your theologians' hands, okay? Because I see a way forward for all of this. I see a way forward so that the atheist, the agnostic, and the person of belief can coexist without our civilization running into hell, into this direction we're going where no one owes anyone else anything, where everybody is just optimizing for self, no matter how much it hurts everyone else, where we are accelerating, where we are hurtling towards self annihilation.
I don't think we're headed there. I
I hope
don't
not.
think, I don't, because I do not accept the assumption that all truth originates in the mind of man.
It does not.
And let me finish this, that reality existed before humans existed,
Mhm.
and therefore humans are subject to reality and do not cannot define reality in total.
Correct.
And therefore, most of what we have within the world of science is not that belief at all. It is the belief that our science defines reality.
Yes.
And if you were to convince a traditional Christian theologian of your model, your system, then you're going to have to find a way to allow there to be a theistic reality apart from the material world.
Yes, I agree with you.
And
I
that the
agree with
material,
you.
but that, let me
I'm
finish.
so sorry.
That the material world is not an illusion. That the material world of reality is consequential. And when a plane loses its engines and it falls out of the sky, it doesn't fall because the pilots have decided to fly it into the ground. It falls because reality of gravity, which is can be scientifically studied, has a consequence that is beyond our ability to control it in an absolute sense. That's just
Correct.
one example. So
Yes.
I would not discourage you at all in what you're doing, but I think it's at the
I
beginning of
I think
something. It's at the
I
beginning of a
yeah,
conversation
and
that
I think you're anticipating me entirely. You and I are of one mind in this. Much of the work I'm doing right now, which I don't know if it'll be volume 5 or a separate book, is to take what has been established already, and it will arrive at exactly what you're saying or as close. I think what we're going to be able to say is number one, remember, the human being has the infinite potential of being wrong. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
every day.
We've manifested that for a long time. The question is, can we get enough of the necessary people to see the right before it's too late? Okay. Now, I want to stay away from the idea that integral liberty is a system. It is more of a way of seeing.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, I can accept
We
that.
we recognize 12 forms of human knowing. Okay. It's not just empirical knowledge. And that's part of the prescriptive is that we have to go back to understanding that pure empiricism is a choice of a filter and not without coincidence. If you were trying to disprove the existence of some transcendent intelligence, and you happen to choose the only form of knowledge that does not acknowledge the possibility of anything transcendent, and you think you've completed the proof, this is part of what we address to. Okay. I don't go any further than saying this is what has been proven. I'm working further and further and further, but all of the work is marching towards establishing the truth of a transcendent intelligence. I can't tell you that I will ever get to the point where I can define it the way theologians do. That, remember, we're talking about edge case. We're talking about at the edge of between the cosmos and what lies beyond it,
Uh,
if
yeah,
anything lies
I'm there
beyond
with
it,
you. I'm
there are limitations of what may possibly be able to say. It doesn't mean that there's nothing we can say,
I
but
agree.
it means there may be limitations. But I would push back just a little bit and saying integral liberty is a system, because that would be integral liberty not listening to its own discoveries. Right?
Okay.
So we are much more of a way of seeing. In fact, I also have in Integral Liberty Volume 2 created the foundational documents of a new political party. Okay.
Okay.
That is, I believe, the solution of these civilizational problems in large measure. And on that, there is the platform. I just want to read you the opening preamble. Integral Liberty Party platform. Preamble. A free people must recognize in their very souls the tensions of ideology, nor the claims of factions, but realities that reveal themselves in the nature of persons, in the structure of community, and in the order of the world. A republic endures only when its citizens honor these truths and build their common life in harmony with the nation rests on the dignity of its labor, the nobility of its people's character, the integrity of its institutions, and the proportion that binds liberty to responsibility. Without nobility in the citizenry, no architecture can sustain freedom. With it, the simplest structure will endure even in times of greatest challenge. We believe that the purpose of public life is not the triumph of factions, but the stewardship of the common good. A republic requires leaders formed by truth, guided by proportion, and summoned by duty. Men and women who understand statesmanship as a calling rather than a career, and who lead by the moral weight of lives rightly ordered. The commitments that follow are offered in plain speech. They seek neither novelty nor ornament, but coherence with the ontological realities upon which any free and humane society must rest. We submit this platform in the conviction that when a people sees truly, they will live nobly, and that whosoever sees the ontological truth of another cannot help but love his fellow man.
You know what I think you need, not that you need to do anything more than you've done.
Oh, no, please.
I think that this is worthy of novelization and worthy of production into some set of films where the right brain side of all this can be illustrated in with living persons
Mm.
engaged in the sort of things that you're talking about. Because I think one of the problems of the last, well, during my lifetime, has been the emptying of the ability of people to think abstractly. We're captured in an abstract world, but we don't think well abstractly. So we don't know how to take an abstract thought
Yes, it's true.
and see it in living in a living way. And I mean that's a
You
lot
make
of
such
what
a good point,
I
Anthony.
spent. I spent a lot of my time trying to do that because I used to live in my head, and when I realized I was living in my head, I had to get out of my head and start living. And
Yes.
so I think
You,
that
you're reminding me of what, objectivism with Ayn Rand. She wrote the books, The Fountainhead. Now,
right,
I am the biggest critic of objectivism because to me, it, it's just Marxism on the other side of the coin.
right.
I don't want to go through all of that. I've written essays on libertarianism, objectivism. All of these 20th century isms share the same problem. They're born of the zero-zero plane of ontological evacuation,
What if
and
you
none of them offer an
so if you take,
answer.
for example, the Matrix? and the series of
Yes.
films that they were, that is an image. Here,
Yes.
this is my world of images, the spectacle.
Yes.
It's a spectacle of the real. It's showing an image of a simulated reality. But I think that that has power for what you're trying to describe. Because let's look at it.
So now I can finish telling you about the Matrix, because the Matrix to me is what already is.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
It's what already is. Our society is already, with Agents Smith, this is private equity and other institutions that are trying to locate any neos, any last remnants of craft or of right hemispheric forms of knowing, and replace that with reified systems. Okay. So I did a podcast with the most famous restaurant consultant in the world, Donald Burns, the restaurant coach. And I brought forward, we did this whole presentation on Chef Neo versus the Age.
Oh yeah, that would be quite interesting.
If we think about it just a little bit, we already live in the Matrix. We are the representation that shimmers for people like you, Ed, who have the power of attunement to see that what we are being sold in left hemispheric hypertrophy, this representation is false. It's false. It's false of everything that is important to what is human.
And it's not only false, but the choice between the red pill and the blue pill is also a false choice.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Because both are
Because as
matrix.
McGillicuddy proves, we got both, but
Right.
one must be dominant. It doesn't mean for the right to engage, the left must be shut off.
No.
It just means the right must be re-engaged. We live more even than in a civilization that's in left hemispheric hypertrophy. We are in a civilization that is in right hemispheric atrophy. That's really the better description.
We have about 5 minutes till we've hit the 2 hour mark. And so I want to bring us to a close because um
Beautiful.
how are you marketing your books and how are you marketing these ideas? How does the public engage with you?
I need help, Ed. I need help. I need to be interacting with thought leaders who are be interested in this stuff. I believe that I was given a gift, moments of clarity. There were people who witnessed things,
Mhm.
saw some moments happening. Um, I know that at the minimum, these books ask the right questions. They it may be that my philosophic system is one day proven to be false, and I would accept that with humility because I am not a trained philosopher. I have These books could have never been written inside the academy because there are about 20 different domains all interacting with
I
each other.
understand that.
Okay. Right? That cannot, no university can possibly tolerate that
But
type of
here's the
work.
truth, Craig.
I could not have written these books without that. Yes.
The truth is that all advancement of knowledge at a significant level happened outside of the academy.
Almost all.
So
It's true.
that is not something you should be concerned about. What you should be concerned is finding people who are thoughtful, who are asking the questions that you're asking and begin to have a conversation with them.
Ed, what's clear is that along with the advanced ontological evacuation we see in industries, governments, it's also true in our institutions where gatekeeping is the largest function of all in many institutions. So how do you, like a lot of what's written in Integral Liberty is very dangerous to the academy. It it
Well,
probably should be resisted in some regards.
I wouldn't worry about that because there are people within the academy who understand this. They understand that their world is changing. They understand that the systems that have controlled the industrialization of everything
Yes.
are now failing, and they're going away, and something is replacing it. And what will replace it at first will be something more akin to community. And I keep finding that when I
Mm.
ask this question, that's the response I get. I see community building, and that means relationships, that means conversation, that means sharing
Yes.
of ideas. And I would and so I would encourage you just to to see how far you can carry a conversation like you do on LinkedIn. I mean, that's how I discovered you. I saw your stuff on LinkedIn.
Yes.
That I want to read this guy. I want to find out who he is and what he's talking about. I mean, for all the negative opinions about LinkedIn, LinkedIn is serving a purpose, and here we are talking because of LinkedIn. So
It's the only social media platform where my work has received any interaction.
yeah,
You know, every single essay I wrote, all 150 of them are somewhere on Instagram. I don't think I've gotten more than 2 comments, right? I want to say one thing before we close.
okay,
I had this choice. But I've been working on integral liberty, up from neoliberalism to restaurant book for 30 years. But as a chef, right,
right,
I did not have the monetary resources to hire editors, research assistants. I decided that AI finally made it possible for me to use that tool and to be able to write books in 1/10 the time, or maybe even 1/30th the time, of something like integral liberty, which would simply be impossible without it.
right,
So, just finding a book. I remember as I was writing Up from Neoliberalism 30 years ago, I started trying to find textbooks like Schumpeter's books. Couldn't find them. I spent 6 months trying to track down one book and finally found a digital copy that I had to purchase. Okay. What I'm trying to say is I make it very clear that I use that I used AI as a tool to help write these books because I don't have 30 years. Neither do I believe civilization does. That was my contention. But I can assure you that every single idea in those books is mine, and I can prove it. I wrote an essay, the final essay in book 3, which is called The Books, the Class of Books That AI Cannot Write. AI is a system embedded within a system. That
right,
is, it shares the ontology of the corporation that writes its code. And that corporation shares the ontology. I call it the evacuated ontology of our system, meaning it cannot possibly see where our civilization is wrong, where the ontological truths are being violated. But that shimmer that Neo can see in the Matrix, no AI can see. Okay. And and so that is why I believe these books are so valuable. AI confirmed it to me time and again. What is being written here could have never been produced by AI on its own. And I think that's going to be one of the problems, um, because the minute you say AI assisted, there's epistemic closure. In Let's face it, most publishing houses today just wait at the finish line. You
yeah.
have to already have the
I don't.
audience. You have to,
I don't. I think some of that worry is manufactured worry. I
okay.
think that um, people like yourself, people like you, we'll use it when it's necessary to be used, and we're going to tell people that we are using it. We're going to be upfront and ethical.
Yes. Yes.
So I don't think you have to
And
worry.
that's, well, I think this is the point is that we there is a growing number of people who realize that something must fundamentally shift at the most primitive level, the most fundamental level. The ontology of our civilization is the core problem.
It's already shifting. It's already shifting. I'm
What I'm
really confident.
presenting is a way that even
Yeah,
the secularists, even the academy, even the sciences can get on board with too. I think it's the linkage between those who are arriving there from other than empirical
yeah.
knowledge forms. I think this can help to unify humanity in embracing the change that's required.
Thank you, Craig, for being with us today, and thank you all for watching. I'm going to post the entire 2 hours here because I think it would be difficult to follow the line of thought if you broke it up. So that's what. So thank you for watching all the way to the end. You get a sticker and a lollipop for your persistence. No, thank you for watching the Eddie Network podcast. I think you need to understand that I talk with all kinds of people, and they all have something worthy of for us to hear. And whether you can understand all of this is not the point. The point that you have listened and you're absorbing a perspective which you will find coming back to you at some point during your life. That is what I'm convinced of. So none of this is a waste of time. And so I'm glad you're here. If you have questions, put them in, put them in on YouTube and on the Substack where I'll be posting this, and we'll certainly make sure Craig is able to respond to you if you have questions. Thank you, Craig, and we'll see you all
Thank you
later.
very much. And people can look to my website, craigshelton.com, if they want to see the books or treatments. It's a good place to get started.
Very good. Thank you. And we'll see you all next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you.